A mafia boss meets a pregnant girl kicked out by her parents on the same night her world falls apart. He marries her by midnight, swearing he'll protect her and the child she carries. But nothing in his world is safe. And nothing about her past is simple. In his arms, she's supposed to be untouchable. But the second the vows are spoken, enemies circle like wolves, whispering that she's his greatest weakness. And when betrayal strikes from inside his own family, her life and their unborn child become the weapon that could destroy him. He is feared by everyone. She has nothing left to lose. Together, they've just started a war they can't escape. Was this midnight marriage the only way to save her life? Or the one choice that will cost them both everything? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her parents' mahogany dining table. The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across her father's stone-cold face as he delivered the words that shattered her world. "Leave this house tonight." His voice held no warmth, no room for argument. "You have brought shame to this family." She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, where her unborn child grew. At 19, she hadn't planned on becoming a mother, but the reality of her situation was now crashing down around her. Her gaze darted to her mother, seeking any sign of support, but the woman who had raised her kept her eyes fixed on her untouched wine glass, lips pressed into a thin line. "Please," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "I can figure this out, I can—" "Enough." Her father's fist slammed against the table, making the fine china rattle. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and get out. Your choices have consequences, Elena. I will not have my political career tarnished by an unwed teenage mother." Tears burned behind her eyes, but Elena refused to let them fall. She straightened her spine, summoning whatever dignity she had left. The marble floors felt cold beneath her feet as she climbed the sweeping staircase to her bedroom one last time. Her hands shook as she grabbed a leather duffel bag from her closet. What does one pack when their entire life is being stripped away? She stuffed in some clothes, her laptop, phone charger, and the emergency cash she'd saved from her allowance. The photo of her grandmother, the only person who might have stood up for her, if she were still alive, went in last. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. "Time's up," her father's voice commanded. Elena slung the bag over her shoulder, taking one last look at the room that had been her sanctuary for 19 years. The pale pink walls, the window seat where she'd spent countless hours reading, the stuffed bear she'd had since childhood, all of it would be gone. The walk down the stairs felt like a death march. Her mother still wouldn't look at her, and her father stood by the front door, holding it open like a guard, eager to be rid of a prisoner. "Your phone plan will be cancelled tomorrow," he informed her coldly. "Your credit cards are already frozen. You made your choice, now live with it." The heavy door slammed behind her with crushing finality. Elena stood on the front steps of her family's mansion, the cool night air biting through her thin sweater. The manicured gardens and wrought iron gates that had once represented safety now felt like the borders of an exile. She walked until her feet ached, the city's lights blurring through her tears. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket as she scrolled through her contacts. Surely someone would help her. But as call after call went unanswered, the truth sank in. Her friends were her father's friends' children. No one would risk their family's social standing to help her. A cramp seized her lower abdomen, making her gasp. She leaned against a brick wall, breathing through the discomfort. "It's okay," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're going to be okay." But the words felt hollow in the empty street. The neighborhood around her grew progressively darker, the pristine sidewalks giving way to cracked concrete and graffiti-covered walls. Every shadow made her heart race. Every distant sound caused her to flinch. She needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere to think and plan. Her designer shoes, not made for this much walking, had begun to blister her feet. The weight of her bag seemed to increase with each step. The streets were eerily quiet now, the kind of quiet that screams danger to every instinct. A whistle cut through the silence. "Hey, pretty girl," a male voice called out. "You lost?" Elena quickened her pace, her heart thundering against her ribs. Heavy footsteps followed, more than one set. She could hear their laughter, the kind that held no humor, only threat. "Come on, sweetheart, we just want to help." Another voice, closer now. She turned down an alley, realizing too late it was a dead end. When she spun around, 3 men blocked her escape route. Their smiles were predatory, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Please, she said, backing away until her shoulders hit the brick wall. I don't have anything valuable. Oh, I wouldn't say that, the tallest one leered, taking a step closer. Pretty thing like you? That's valuable enough. Elena's hand instinctively covered her stomach, her other gripping her bag like a shield. The men were closing in, their shadows stretching toward her like grasping fingers in the dim light. Then everything changed. A new presence filled the alley, bringing with it an aura of lethal calm. The men turned, their predatory confidence evaporating as they faced the newcomer. Leave! The single word carried more menace than all their threats combined. It came from a man Elena couldn't fully see, his broad silhouette blocking the alley's entrance. Hey man, we were just... One of the harassers started. I said leave. The stranger's voice dropped even lower, a sound like steel wrapped in silk. Unless you prefer to leave in pieces. The effect was immediate. The men practically tripped over themselves in their haste to escape, disappearing into the night like smoke in the wind. In their absence, Elena could finally see her savior clearly as he stepped forward. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step purposeful and controlled. His suit was perfectly tailored, black as midnight and probably worth more than most cars. But it was his face that caught and held her attention. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Eyes that held darkness she couldn't begin to fathom. Damiano Vitale, he introduced himself, his voice still carrying that edge of danger, though somewhat softened. And you, Bella, are a long way from where you belong. Elena pressed herself further against the wall, her instincts screaming that she had just traded one kind of danger for another, possibly far deadlier kind. This man, with his expensive suit and commanding presence, radiated power, the kind of power that came with a price, the kind that left bodies in its wake. The men's leering faces drained of color as Damiano stepped into the dim light. His presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the narrow alley, leaving only the acrid stench of fear. Elena pressed herself against the brick wall, her heart hammering as she watched the scene unfold. Leave. The single word fell from Damiano's lips like a death sentence. One of the thugs, braver or stupider than the rest, reached for something in his jacket. Before his hand could close around whatever weapon he sought, Damiano moved with terrifying grace. In 3 fluid steps he had the man's arm twisted behind his back, forcing him to his knees. The crack of bone splitting echoed off the walls, followed by a strangled scream. I said leave. Damiano's voice remained eerily calm. He released the injured man, who scrambled backward on all fours like a wounded animal. The others fled, their footsteps fading into the night, leaving their fallen friend to limp after them. Elena's legs trembled. She'd never witnessed such casual violence. Yet her rescuer now stood perfectly still, adjusting his expensive suit cuffs, as if he hadn't just shattered a man's arm. His dark eyes fixed on her, calculating and intense. Thank you, she managed, forcing steel into her voice. But I can handle myself from here. A hint of amusement crossed his face. Can you? His gaze dropped to her midsection where her loose sweater couldn't quite hide the slight swell of her pregnancy. A young woman, alone at night, in this part of the city, carrying a child no less. Heat rushed to her cheeks. My situation is none of your concern. Everything in my territory is my concern. He took a step closer, and Elena fought the urge to retreat. His cologne, something expensive and subtle, mixed with the metallic tang of violence still hanging in the air. Why are you here? I'm just passing through. She lifted her chin, meeting his stare despite the way it made her pulse quicken. With a suitcase? He nodded to her bag. Running from something or someone? The events of the evening crashed over her again. Her father's cold dismissal, her mother's averted eyes, the slam of the front door behind her. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. My parents kicked me out tonight, when they found out about. She gestured vaguely to her stomach. Something dangerous flickered in Damiano's eyes. And the father? Not in the picture. She gripped her suitcase handle tighter. Look, I appreciate your help, but I need to find a hotel or get in the car. He nodded toward a sleek black Mercedes idling at the alley's entrance. Elena hadn't even noticed it arrive. I couldn't possibly... That wasn't a request. His tone remained level, but authority radiated from every syllable. The next group of men you encounter might not scatter so easily when I'm not around. Elena weighed her options. The streets were dangerous, she had limited cash, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. The baby seemed to flutter inside her, as if sensing her uncertainty. This man was dangerous. She just watched him break someone without hesitation, but something in her gut told her his danger wasn't directed at her. "Why help me?" she asked. "Get in the car," he repeated, "and maybe I'll tell you." A large man in a black suit held the car door open, his expression impassive. Elena took a deep breath and slid into the plush leather interior. Damiano settled beside her, his presence filling the space with unspoken power. The door closed with a soft thud that felt oddly final. The car glided through empty streets, leaving the city's grime behind for progressively more expensive neighborhoods. Elena watched the transformation through tinted windows, from crumbling buildings to manicured lawns, from flickering streetlights to elegant lampposts. Neither she nor Damiano spoke, but she felt his attention like a physical weight. Finally, they turned onto a private drive, approaching massive iron gates that opened silently at their approach. Elena's breath caught as the mansion came into view. 3 stories of pale stone rose before them, windows gleaming like eyes in the darkness. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, their weapons visible even in the low light. The car stopped at the front entrance, where more suits waited at attention. Elena's door opened, and she stepped out on shaky legs. The night air felt cooler here, cleaner somehow, but also heavy with significance. She looked back at the gates as they closed with a metallic clang. Damiano appeared at her side, his hand settling on the small of her back. The touch was light but inexorable, guiding her toward the massive front doors. "Welcome to your new home, Elena." She startled at the use of her name. She hadn't told him what it was. But before she could ask how he knew, the doors swung open to reveal a marble foyer larger than her parents' entire first floor. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows across the walls, and a sweeping staircase curved up to the darkness above. More suited men lined the walls, but these weren't just security. They looked at Damiano with a mixture of fear and reverence that made Elena's skin prickle. Who exactly was this man who commanded such respect, who could break bones without blinking, who lived in a fortress pretending to be a house? The doors closed behind them with the same finality as the gates. Elena stood in the center of the foyer, her shabby suitcase a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. She felt the weight of the moment settle around her shoulders like a cloak, or perhaps a chain. Whatever safety she'd found here would come with a price, and as Damiano's dark eyes met hers across the marble expanse, she wondered if she was ready to pay it. The dining room could have hosted 50 people, but only 2 places were set at the massive mahogany table. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over silver place settings and delicate china. Elena sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap, while Damiano cut into his steak with methodical precision. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft clink of his knife against fine china. His dark eyes never left her face, patient and calculating, like a wolf watching its prey tire itself out before striking. "You need to eat." His voice was quiet but firm, gesturing to her untouched plate of perfectly seared steak and roasted vegetables. Elena shook her head. "I'm not hungry." "The child is." Those 3 words hit her like a physical blow. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, still flat but carrying such precious cargo. The baby needed nutrients, needed strength. She couldn't let her fear or pride endanger the innocent life growing inside her. With trembling fingers, she picked up her fork and took a small bite. The meat practically melted on her tongue. It was probably the most expensive thing she'd ever tasted. "How far along are you?" Damiano asked, watching her eat with apparent satisfaction. 10 weeks. Elena forced herself to take another bite, though her throat felt tight. "And the father?" There was an edge to his voice now, sharp as the knife in his hand. Elena set down her fork. "A mistake. He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with either of us when I told him." Damiano's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Your family, they threw you out tonight?" "My father said I'd brought shame to the family name." The word still burned, hours later. "My mother." She just stood there, silent. "The Rosses always did care more about appearances than blood." At her startled look, he added, "Yes, I know who you are, Elena Rossi. Your father's political aspirations make him visible to men in my position." A chill ran down her spine. She'd suspected Damiano was dangerous, but this casual mention of monitoring politicians confirmed her fears about exactly what kind of man had brought her into his home. "What position is that exactly?" His smile was cold. "One that ensures I can protect what's mine." Before she could process that statement, He set down his utensils and leaned forward. I have a proposition for you, Elena. Her heart started pounding. This was it, the price for his protection. Marry me, tonight. By midnight, you'll have my name, my protection, my resources. Your child will be born of Italy, with all the privilege and security that brings. Elena's fork clattered against her plate. Marry you? But we just met. You don't know anything about me. I know you're carrying an innocent child. I know you have nowhere else to go. I know that out there. He gestured toward the windows. There are men who would hurt you both without hesitation, and I know that I can prevent all of that with a single word. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would you want to marry a pregnant stranger? Something dark passed behind his eyes. My reasons are my own, but know this. I protect what's mine, Elena. Absolutely. Completely. No one would dare touch you with my ring on your finger. She pushed back from the table. I need to think. This is insane. Think quickly. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. Your alternatives are limited. The streets aren't kind to young women, especially pregnant ones. You have no money, no friends who answered your calls, and no family willing to help. My parents. The words caught in her throat. Maybe if I tried one more time. Damiano's expression softened fractionally. Make the call. He led her to his study, a masculine space of dark wood and leather. A phone sat on his massive desk. With shaking fingers, Elena dialed her childhood home. Her father answered on the third ring. Hello? Daddy? Her voice broke. Please let me come home. I'm scared. You are no longer my daughter. His voice was ice. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone, tears streaming down her face. The last thread of hope snapped inside her chest. A sob tore from her throat, then another, until she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Through her tears, she was dimly aware of Damiano watching her from the doorway. He didn't move to comfort her, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply waited, knowing she had to face this moment of complete abandonment before she could make her choice. When her sobs finally quieted to hiccups, she raised her head to meet his gaze. The study suddenly felt smaller, more confined. The massive windows showed only darkness beyond, and the door behind Damiano might as well have been a wall. There was no way out except through him. Have you decided? He asked quietly. Elena wrapped her arms around her middle, protecting the tiny life that had cost her everything, and might now be forcing her into the arms of a dangerous man. But what choice did she have? The streets would kill them both. At least Damiano offered security, protection, a future for her child. Her silence was answer enough. Damiano moved into the study, his presence filling the space like smoke. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers immediately. The ceremony will be brief, but binding. Elena closed her eyes, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. In the space of one night, she'd lost her family, her freedom, and now she was about to lose the last thing she had, control over her own fate. Elena's heart thundered as Damiano led her through his mansion's winding halls. The marble floors echoed their footsteps until he stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall. With practiced ease, he pressed against an ornate panel, revealing a hidden door. Watch your step, he murmured, taking her elbow. The gesture was surprisingly gentle for hands she'd seen strike fear into men twice his size. They descended a narrow stone staircase, the temperature dropping with each step. Battery-powered sconces cast eerie shadows on the ancient walls. Elena's legs trembled, partly from exhaustion and partly from fear of what awaited below. Why here? She whispered, her voice bouncing off the stone. Why not a regular church? Because regular churches aren't safe anymore. His grip tightened slightly. Not for men like me. The passage opened into a small underground chapel that looked frozen in time. Carved wooden pews lined either side of a narrow aisle. At the altar, surrounded by flickering candles, stood an elderly priest in traditional robes. His weathered face showed no surprise at their arrival. What did surprise Elena were the 4 armed men positioned at each corner of the room, their black suits failing to hide the bulge of weapons beneath. Their expressions were stone, but their eyes tracked every movement. Elena looked down at herself, still in the same clothes she'd worn when her father threw her out, now wrinkled and stained with tears. This wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding day. There should have been white lace, flowers, music, not guns and guards and the weight of unspoken threats. Approach, my children, the priest intoned, his Italian accent thick. He showed no concern for Elena's appearance, or the armed men surrounding them. Damiano guided her forward with that same contradictory touch, commanding yet careful, as if she might shatter. The candles cast strange shadows across his face, making him look both beautiful and terrifying. "We gather in secret," the priest began, "to witness the joining of Damiano Vitale and Elena Rossi in holy matrimony." Elena's hands shook as the ceremony proceeded. The traditional words felt hollow, mockery of choice when she had none. Yet when Damiano took her hand to slide the ring onto her finger, she couldn't help but notice how warm his skin was, how delicately he handled her. The ring itself was stunning, a massive diamond surrounded by smaller stones, clearly an heirloom. It felt impossibly heavy on her finger, like a beautiful shackle. "With this ring," Damiano said, his voice low and intense, "I thee Wednesday." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending an unexpected shiver through her body. When it was her turn to speak the vows, Elena's voice trembled. I thee Wednesday." The words tasted like surrender. The priest raised his hands to bless them, but before he could speak, the chapel door burst open with a bang that echoed like gunfire. Elena jumped, instinctively pressing closer to Damiano. His arm went around her waist, pulling her against his side as he turned to face the intruder. A man in a cheap suit stood in the doorway, sneering. Elena recognized the distinctive tattoo on his neck, a rival family's mark. Damiano's guards had their weapons drawn in an instant, but the intruder seemed unconcerned. "So the rumors are true," he drawled in Italian, his eyes raking over Elena with contempt. "The great Damiano Vitale taking a pregnant whore for a bride. Wait until everyone hears how soft you've become." Damiano's body went rigid against hers, but his voice remained chillingly calm. "You've made two mistakes tonight. First, you dared to enter my territory. Second," his grip tightened protectively around Elena, "you spoke about my wife." He gave a slight nod to his men. Before Elena could blink, 3 shots rang out in perfect synchronization. The intruder's body crumpled to the ground, blood pooling on the ancient stone floor. Elena couldn't stop the scream that tore from her throat. She tried to turn away, but Damiano held her firmly in place. "Look," he commanded softly. "This is your world now. You need to understand what that means." Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the dead man. The priest continued his blessing as if nothing had happened, his words drowned out by the ringing in her ears. This was real. This was her life now. Violence and beauty intertwined, death and devotion hand in hand. Damiano turned her to face him, his calloused hands cupping her face with surprising tenderness. His thumbs wiped away her tears as he forced her to meet his gaze. Those dark eyes held both a warning and a promise. "You're mine now, Elena," he said, his voice low but full of authority, "and I kill for what's mine." The candlelight caught the diamond on her finger, sending fractured light dancing across the chapel walls. Blood seeped closer to her shoes, a stark reminder of the price of Damiano's protection. She was a Mafia wife now, marked for both privilege and danger. The ring on her finger might save her life, or be the reason she lost it. Guards moved efficiently to dispose of the body, while Damiano kept her locked in his embrace. His heartbeat was steady against her palm, unchanged by the violence he'd just ordered. This was the man she'd married, capable of both tenderness and terror, gentle touches and deadly commands. The priest finished his blessing, making the sign of the cross over them. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Elena almost laughed at the irony. It wasn't God who had joined them, but desperation and power. Yet as Damiano's hand pressed protectively against her stomach, where their future stepchild grew, she wondered if perhaps this unholy union was her salvation after all. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden ribbons across silk sheets she'd never felt against her skin before. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back the wedding. The gunshot, Damiano's fierce words claiming her as his own. She sat up slowly, one hand instinctively going to her stomach. The bedroom was larger than her old apartment, decorated in cream and gold with antique furniture that probably cost more than her father's car. Outside, she spotted 2 armed men patrolling the manicured gardens. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't just a bride. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. The walk-in closet held rows of designer clothing, all in her size. Someone had been planning this, watching her long before last night. The thought made her shiver. She chose a simple white dress, not wanting to embrace these gifts too eagerly. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, hating how her voice trembled. Damiano filled the doorway, immaculate in a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark eye swept over her, lingering on the slight curve of her belly visible through the dress. "You slept late," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet command from last night. "The doctor will see you at 10 o'clock. "Doctor?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't need. You're carrying my child now." His tone left no room for argument. "You'll have the best care available." "Your child?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "You can't just claim, I already have." He stepped closer, and Elena forced herself not to back away. "When I put that ring on your finger, everything about you became mine to protect, including the baby." A maid appeared with a breakfast tray, fresh fruit, yogurt, whole grain toast, and herbal tea. Everything a pregnant woman should eat. Helena's empty stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. "Eat," Damiano ordered softly. "Then Maria will show you around the parts of the house you're allowed to access." "Allowed?" Elena's hands clenched. "So I'm a prisoner?" His jaw tightened. "You're my wife, and there are people who would hurt you to get to me. Until I eliminate that threat, you stay inside where I can protect you." "For how long?" "As long as necessary." He turned to leave, then paused. "Don't try to leave, Elena. The guards have orders. It would upset me to have to retrieve you." The threat hung in the air even after he left. Elena sank into a plush chair, fighting tears. The food smelled wonderful, but each bite felt like accepting her cage. Maria turned out to be a motherly woman who spoke with a thick Italian accent. She guided Elena through a maze of opulent rooms, a library filled with leather-bound books, a conservatory dripping with exotic plants, a private cinema, and a pool housed in a glass pavilion. Everything beautiful, everything trapped behind walls and guards. The doctor arrived precisely at 10, a distinguished older woman who treated Elena with gentle efficiency. Blood pressure, blood tests, ultrasound, everything pronounced healthy. 7 weeks along, she confirmed. "The bambino is strong." Elena caught Damiano watching from the doorway during the examination, his expression unreadable. He disappeared before she could confront him. The day stretched endlessly. Elena explored her allowed spaces, always aware of the guards tracking her movements. She found a piano in the library and played until her fingers ached, the melody echoing through empty rooms. At sunset, Maria announced dinner would be served in the small dining room. Elena found Damiano already seated at the intimate table, jacket removed and sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms marked with faint scars. The sight reminded her of what he was, what he did. He stood as she entered, pulling out her chair. It was closer to his than she expected, their elbows nearly touching as they Saturday. The first course arrived, a delicate soup that made her mouth water. "You play beautifully," he said, breaking the silence. "The piano has been silent since my sister." He trailed off, pain flickering across his face before disappearing behind his usual mask. Elena found herself wanting to ask about his sister, but feared the answer. "I studied for years," she said instead. "Music was my escape when my parents." Now it was her turn to fall silent, remembering their cruel dismissal. Damiano's hand found her belly, warm and possessive through the thin fabric of her dress. Elena froze, caught between the urge to pull away and a strange flutter in her chest at his touch. His fingers splayed wider, as if trying to shield the tiny life growing beneath. "No one will ever throw you away again," he murmured, voice rough with emotion she hadn't thought him capable of. "You're safe here, both of you." Elena shivered, not from fear this time, but from the tenderness in his touch so at odds with the man who had ordered an execution without blinking just hours ago. She looked up to find his dark eyes fixed on her face, filled with an intensity that stole her breath. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why did you really marry me?" His thumb stroked small circles on her belly, making her skin tingle even through the dress. "Because when I saw you in that alley, fierce despite your fear, protecting your child even when the world abandoned you, I knew you were meant to be mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, she felt an answering heat curl through her veins. This man was dangerous, a killer, a criminal, and yet his touch held such reverence it made her heart ache. The moments stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then Damiano withdrew his hand, leaving her skin cold where his warmth had been. But his eyes promised this was only the beginning. For better or worse, she belonged to him now. The question was, Could she learn to belong with him? The silk sheets offered little comfort as Elena thrashed in her sleep. In her nightmare, the dark alley stretched endlessly, filled with grabbing hands and mocking laughter. Her pregnant belly made her slow, vulnerable. She couldn't escape. The thugs circled closer, their faces twisted with cruel intent. No! Elena bolted upright, her scream piercing the quiet mansion. Sweat dampened her nightgown, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Before she could fully wake, the bedroom door burst open. Damiano filled the doorway, gun drawn, scanning for threats. His bare chest gleamed in the moonlight, every muscle tensed for violence. When he saw only Elena trembling in bed, he lowered the weapon. "Bella?" he said softly, approaching with careful steps. "What happened?" Elena drew her knees to her chest, trying to stop shaking. Just a nightmare. About the alley." His jaw tightened. Without asking permission, he sat on the edge of her bed. "You're safe now. No one will ever touch you again." "I know." She wiped tears from her cheeks. "I'm sorry I woke you. I wasn't sleeping." His voice held a raw edge she hadn't heard before. He hesitated, then admitted, "I rarely do." Elena studied his face in the dim light. Shadows lived under his eyes, etching lines of exhaustion she hadn't noticed before. "Why not?" "Sleep makes you vulnerable." His fingers traced absent patterns on her blanket. "In my world, vulnerability gets you killed." "That sounds lonely," she whispered. His dark eyes met hers. "It is." Without thinking, Elena reached for his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from weapons, yet his touch remained gentle. They sat in silence, connected by that simple contact. "You can't keep me locked up forever," she said finally. "I'm not a possession to be stored away." Damiano's grip tightened. "You're my wife. A wife you forced to marry you." The words burst out before she could stop them. "You gave me no choice. I gave you safety." He stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. "Would you prefer I left you in that alley? Let those animals have their way with you?" "Of course not." Elena pushed back the covers, following him. "But trading one cage for another isn't freedom. I need to be able to make my own choices." He whirled to face her. "Your choices put you and our child at risk." "Our child?" Elena's hand flew to her belly. "This baby isn't yours. The moment you became my wife, that child became mine." His voice dropped dangerously. "I will protect what's mine." "Through control? Through fear?" She stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated. "Is that how you show you care?" "You have no idea how I show I care." Before she could react, his hand cupped the back of her neck, pulling her against him. His breath fanned her lips as he growled. "Should I show you?" Elena's heart thundered. She should push him away, should remember all the reasons this was wrong. Instead, she found herself staring at his mouth, remembering how gently those lips had brushed her hand during their wedding. "You're trembling," he murmured. "Because you frighten me." "No." His thumb stroked her jaw. "Because I excite you." When his mouth claimed hers, Elena gasped. The kiss was hungry, demanding, breaking through her defenses like they were paper. She tried to resist, pressing her hands against his chest. But his skin burned beneath her palms, and instead of pushing away, she found herself pulling him closer. Damiano growled his approval, deepening the kiss. One hand tangled in her hair while the other splayed possessively across her lower back. He tasted of danger and desire, of protection and passion. Elena's head spun as need flooded her veins. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against her lips. "Tell me you don't want this." But Elena was tired of fighting, tired of denying the attraction that had simmered since that first night. Instead of words, she answered by pulling him back into the kiss. Their passion exploded. Damiano lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed. His touches were both commanding and reverent as he explored her body. Each kiss marked her as his, yet his hands remained achingly gentle when they caressed her swollen belly. "Beautiful," he breathed, watching her arch beneath him. "La mia regina, my queen." Elena lost herself in sensation, in the weight of him above her, the heat of skin on skin. He worshipped her body with the same intensity he brought to everything else, determined to claim every gasp, every moan. When pleasure finally crashed over her, she cried out his name like a prayer. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady beneath her ear. Questions tumbled through her mind, but she was too exhausted to voice them. "Sleep, Bella," Damiano murmured, stroking her hair. "I'll keep the nightmares away." Elena wanted to argue that this complicated everything, that giving in to desire didn't solve their problems. But his warmth surrounded her, making her feel safe in a way she hadn't since that first positive pregnancy test. As she drifted off, she realized that while she might still be in a cage, at least now she wasn't facing it alone. The last thing she felt was Damiano pressing a kiss to her temple, his arms tightening protectively around her. In that moment, she couldn't tell if she was his prisoner or his salvation. Perhaps she was both. The steel door creaked open, and Elena's heart stopped. Through the gap, she saw Damiano standing over a kneeling man in the basement, his shoulders rigid with contained fury. She hadn't meant to find this place. She'd only been exploring the mansion's lower levels, trying to map her new prison. Now she couldn't look away. "You thought you could steal from me?" Damiano's voice was ice cold, nothing like the gentle tone he used with her. "From my family?" The man sobbed, blood dripping from his split lip. "Please, boss, I didn't—" Silence. One word, and the man's pleas died. Damiano circled him slowly, like a wolf sizing up wounded prey. "I gave you everything. A position, trust, and you repay me with betrayal?" Elena pressed her hand against her mouth, stifling a gasp as Damiano's fist connected with the man's jaw. The crack echoed through the concrete room. She should run, should close the door and pretend she never saw this, but her feet remained frozen. "Your wife," the man choked out. "She begged me. We needed the money for our son's surgery." "Then you should have come to me," Damiano roared, his composure finally cracking. "I take care of my own. But you chose to steal, to lie." He pulled out a gun, the metal gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. "Now your son grows up without a father." Elena couldn't watch anymore. She stumbled backward, her footsteps echoing. Damiano's head snapped up, his dark eyes meeting hers through the gap. For a moment, something like shame crossed his face. "Elena," his voice was strained. "You shouldn't be here." She ran. Through the corridors, up the stairs, her heart pounding against her ribs. Behind her, a gunshot rang out, making her flinch. She made it to their bedroom. No, her bedroom. She couldn't think of it as theirs, despite last night, and sank onto the edge of the bed. Minutes or hours later, the door opened. Damiano stood there, his white shirt pristine despite what she knew he'd done, but his hands trembled slightly as he pushed them through his dark hair. "You!" saw. It wasn't a question. "How can you?" Elena's voice cracked. "How can you kill so easily?" He moved to the window, staring out at the garden where roses bloomed red as blood. "Nothing about it is easy, but weakness gets people killed in my world." "Is that what mercy is to you? Weakness?" His shoulders tensed. "Yes." He turned to face her, his expression haunted. "I learned that lesson too late, with too high a price." Elena stood, drawn to the pain in his voice despite her horror. "What happened?" Silence stretched between them. Then, "I had a sister, Lucia." His words came slow, as if each one cost him. "She was 17, beautiful, pure, everything I wasn't." Elena's hand drifted to her belly, to the child growing there. Damiano tracked the movement, his jaw tight. "One night, she begged me to let her go to a friend's party. I knew it wasn't safe, we had tensions with the Russo family. But she cried, and I—" He swallowed hard. "I was weak. I let her go." "Damiano. They took her, tortured her. By the time I found her," his fist slammed into the wall. "I was too late. My mercy, my weakness, it killed her." Elena moved closer, her heart aching. Now she understood his obsessive need to protect her, to control every aspect of her safety. Each restriction was built on the foundation of that loss. "Since then, I've never hesitated, never shown mercy, because the alternative is watching someone I—" He cut himself off, but Elena heard the unspoken word. "Someone I love." She reached for his hand, the one that had trembled, that had pulled a trigger less than an hour ago. He let her take it, his fingers curling around hers. "The man downstairs," she said softly. "His son. Will have the best medical care money can buy." Damiano's voice was rough. "I'm a monster, Elena, but I'm not cruel. The boy will want for nothing." But his father made his choice. Elena looked up at him, this man who killed without hesitation yet touched her with such gentleness. The man who had saved her in that alley, who had given her child a name, who bore scars so deep they shaped his every action. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "Monsters don't tremble." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt the shudder that ran through him, felt decades of guilt and pain pouring out as she held him. This was a side of him no one else saw, the brother who had failed, the man who built walls of violence to protect his heart. In his study across the mansion, Damiano's consigliere, Marco, sat across from two men with hard eyes and expensive suits. They passed him a thick envelope which he tucked into his jacket. "The boss has a weakness now," Marco murmured. "That girl, she's changed him, made him vulnerable." One of the men smiled coldly. "Then she's exactly what we need. Tell us everything." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of the Vitali estate. Elena breathed in deeply, savoring the sweet scent of blooming roses. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. The high walls surrounding the property no longer seemed so oppressive, not with Damiano walking beside her, his strong presence both protective and comforting. "The roses are beautiful," Elena said, trailing her fingers along the velvet petals. "I never thought I'd find such life in a place like this." Damiano's hand rested on the small of her back, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "This garden was my sister's sanctuary," he admitted quietly. "I've kept it exactly as she left it." Elena turned to study his face, catching the flash of pain in his dark eyes before he masked it. These moments of vulnerability from him were rare and precious. She placed her hand over her growing belly, now visible beneath her dress at 4 months along. "Tell me again," she whispered, needing to hear the words that had become their daily ritual. Damiano's lips curved slightly. "You and the baby will always be safe. I swear it on my life, Bella." His hand joined hers over their child. "No one will ever hurt what's mine." They continued their slow walk through the garden paths as the sun began to set. Guards maintained their discreet distance, positioned at regular intervals along the property walls. Elena had grown used to their constant presence, understanding now that they were as much a part of this life as the luxury that surrounded her. "We should go inside," Damiano said eventually, noting the deepening shadows. "It's getting cold." Elena nodded, allowing him to guide her back toward the mansion. The kitchen staff had prepared dinner, a feast of traditional Italian dishes that made her mouth water. As they ate, Elena noticed Damiano seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently than usual. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting down her fork. "Just business," he replied tersely, but something in his tone made her uneasy. Later that evening, as Elena prepared for bed in their shared suite, a strange dizziness overcame her. She gripped the bathroom counter, blinking rapidly as the room began to spin. "Damiano?" she called out, her voice weak. The last thing she remembered was the sound of breaking glass and unfamiliar voices before everything went black. When Elena regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the biting cold of metal against her wrists. Her head throbbed, and her mouth felt like cotton. Slowly, she forced her heavy eyelids open, taking in her surroundings through blurred vision. She was in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. Dirty windows high above let in weak moonlight, casting everything in shadowy relief. The chair she was tied to was bolted to the concrete floor, and her ankles were secured with zip ties. "The princess is awake," a mocking voice called out. Footsteps echoed across the vast space. Elena's vision finally cleared enough to recognize Antonio, Damiano's consigliere, approaching with several armed men. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "Why?" she managed to croak. Antonio's laugh was cold. "Because the great Damiano Vitali has become weak. All because of you." He circled her chair slowly. "The wolf has been tamed by a little girl carrying his pup. It's pathetic." One of the other men spoke up. "We should call him now. Let him hear her scream." "No," Antonio said sharply. "We wait. Let him suffer not knowing. By morning he'll be ready to give us anything we want." Elena's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain still, remembering everything she'd learned about these men and their world. "Show weakness, and they would destroy you." Her baby kicked inside her, as if sensing her distress. "He'll kill you all," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her fear. Slowly, one by one, Antonio backhanded her, the ring on his finger cutting her cheek. "Shut up, whore! You don't know anything about our world." But Elena saw the flicker of uncertainty in the other men's eyes. They knew what Damiano was capable of. They had seen his rage, his precision when extracting vengeance, and now they had taken his pregnant wife, the one thing he had sworn to protect above all else. As the men moved away to discuss their plans in hushed voices, Elena closed her eyes. She could feel blood trickling down her cheek, but the pain barely registered. All she could think about was Damiano, and the darkness she had glimpsed beneath his controlled exterior. The beast that lived inside him would be unleashed tonight. Her baby kicked again, stronger this time. Elena's hands instinctively tried to move to her stomach, but the restraints held firm. Tears pricked at her eyes as fear for their child overwhelmed her. "Damiano," she whispered, so quietly the words were barely a breath. "Please, find us." The warehouse creaked and groaned around her, wind whistling through broken windows. Somewhere in the distance she heard a dog barking. Elena forced herself to take steady breaths, knowing she needed to stay calm for the baby. She silently prayed that Damiano would come for them before it was too late. The crystal decanter shattered against the wall, spraying expensive whiskey across the mahogany panels. Damiano's roar of rage echoed through his study, making even his most hardened soldiers flinch. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white with fury. "How?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "How did they get past our security?" The guard captain Marco stood at attention, sweat beading on his forehead. "Sir, they had inside help. The cameras were disabled." Guards were drugged. Another crash as Damiano swept everything off his desk. Papers scattered, his laptop cracked against the floor. The wedding photo of Elena caught his eye as it fell. Her small smile, the way she'd looked at him with growing trust. The frame cracked when it hit the ground. "Find Alberto," Damiano ordered, naming his consigliere. "Bring him to me, now." But they already knew. Alberto was gone. The betrayal cut deep, but Damiano had no time for pain. Elena was out there, pregnant and afraid. His child, their child, in danger. He grabbed his phone, making rapid calls to every family that owed him favors. Within minutes, his network activated across the city. The Vitali soldiers mobilized like never before, their boss's fury igniting a wave of violence that would be whispered about for years. "Search every warehouse, every safe house, every rat hole where they might hide her." His orders cracked like gunshots. "Anyone who stands in our way dies. Anyone who lies dies. Anyone who helped them dies slower." His most trusted captain, Giuseppe, entered with fresh intel. "Boss, we found 2 of Alberto's men trying to flee the city." Damiano's eyes glittered dangerously. "Bring them to me." The interrogation was brutal. Even Giuseppe, who'd seen Damiano work before, had to look away. The boss's usual cold precision gave way to raw fury. Blood stained his white shirt, but he didn't stop until he had answers. "The old textile district," one man finally gasped. Warehouse 13. Damiano didn't wait for more. He strode through his mansion, soldiers scrambling to keep up. In his private armory, he methodically selected weapons. His favorite pistol, throwing knives. The garrote wire he rarely needed to use personally anymore. "Sir," Giuseppe ventured carefully, "let us handle the initial breach. You're too valuable to." "No." Damiano's voice could have frozen hell. "They took my wife, my child. I will show them what that means." More reports flooded in. His network confirmed movement in the textile district. Security cameras caught glimpses of unmarked vans. Everything pointed to Warehouse 13. In his office again, Damiano paused at his desk. He picked up the fallen wedding photo, carefully removing it from its cracked frame. Elena's face looked up at him, so young, so fierce despite her fear. He remembered how she'd challenged him, even while accepting his protection. How she'd seen past his monster's mask to the man beneath. "They think you're my weakness, Bella," he whispered to her image. "They don't understand. You make me stronger. You give me something worth fighting for." He tucked the photo into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Around him, his men prepared for war. Cars were readied, weapons loaded, medics stationed for the aftermath. The Vitali family had never mobilized with such unified purpose. Damiano checked his watch. Barely 4 hours since Elena's abduction. 4 hours too long. But now he knew where to find her, and God help anyone who stood in his way. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his spotters. Guards were visible outside Warehouse 13. At least 20 armed men. Good. Let them gather. Let them think their numbers would save them. Damiano had killed his way to the top of the underworld for a reason. Tonight, he would remind everyone why they called him Il Lupo, the wolf. He turned to his assembled captains, his cold smile promising violence. "We move in 15 minutes. No survivors except Elena. Anyone who touched her dies slowly. Anyone who helped dies slower." Giuseppe nodded grimly. "The cars are ready, boss." Damiano touched the photo in his pocket one last time. His voice softened just for a moment, a whisper meant only for her. "Hold on, Bella. I'm coming." Then the softness vanished, replaced by the calculated fury that had made him the most feared man in the city. He strode toward the garage, his men falling in behind him like shadows. The hunt was on, and the wolf was out for blood. The warehouse air hung thick with fear and diesel fumes. Elena's wrist burned against the rope binding her to the metal chair, but she kept her chin high, meeting her captor's sneers with unwavering defiance. Her pregnancy had reached 4 months now, and she curved her body protectively around her small bump, determined to shield it from their cruelty. Your husband's empire for your life, the traitor Consigliere paced before her, his expensive shoes clicking against concrete. Simple trade, really, though I doubt he values you that much. Elena spat at his feet. You don't know him at all. The back of his hand cracked across her cheek, but she refused to cry out. Blood trickled from her split lip as she glared up at him. 5 other men circled her like vultures, their weapons trained on the warehouse doors. Such spirit, the consigliere mocked. Let's see how long that lasts when we start sending pieces of you to your beloved boss. Elena's heart hammered, but she thought of Damiano, how his hands trembled when he touched her belly, how his eyes softened only for her. She knew what these men didn't, that they had awakened something far worse than a mafia boss. They had provoked a desperate man protecting what he loved. He's going to kill every single one of you, she whispered, her voice steady despite her fear. The first explosion rocked the building's foundation. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, a carefully orchestrated assault. Her captors scattered, shouting orders and returning fire. The consigliere grabbed Elena's hair, pressing a gun to her temple. Your wolf is here, he hissed in her ear. But he's too late. The warehouse doors burst open in a shower of sparks and metal. Damiano strode through the chaos like an avenging demon, his black suit splattered with blood, his eyes burning with cold fury. 2 men charged him, both dropped with precise headshots before they could reach him. Il lupo! Someone screamed before a bullet silenced them forever. Elena watched in terrified awe as Damiano moved with lethal grace, each shot finding its mark. His men flooded the warehouse behind him, but he needed no help. This was personal, and his rage made him unstoppable. The consigliere dragged Elena backward, using her as a human shield. Stop right there, Vitali. 1 more step and she dies. Damiano paused, his gun trained steadily on them. Blood dripped from his sleeve, but Elena couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. His face was a mask of controlled violence, yet when his eyes met hers, she saw the raw fear beneath his fury. Elena, his voice carried across the warehouse, deep and commanding. Close your eyes, Bella. She obeyed without hesitation. A single shot cracked through the air, followed by a wet gurgle. The consigliere's grip went slack, and his body thudded to the floor behind her. When she opened her eyes, Damiano was already cutting through her restraints with a knife, his hands shaking as they freed her. Did they hurt you? He demanded, fingers gently probing the bruise on her cheek. The baby? We're okay, she assured him, leaning into his touch. I knew you'd come. His composure cracked then, something wild and desperate breaking through. He fell to his knees before her, pressing his face against her stomach. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he wrapped his arms around her waist. I've killed for you, he confessed, his voice raw and broken. I'll burn for you. You and the child, you are mine. Forever. Elena ran her fingers through his dark hair, soothing him as he trembled. Around them, his men secured the warehouse, but Damiano remained on his knees, holding her like she might disappear. The feared mafia boss brought low by love and terror. I'm yours, she whispered, understanding now that his possession was born of devotion, not just control. We both are. He stood slowly, cradling her face in his blood-stained hands. His kiss was fierce and desperate, tasting of gunpowder and tears. When he pulled back, his eyes held a promise more binding than any wedding vow. No one will ever touch you again, he swore. I'll kill them all first. Elena knew it wasn't an empty threat. The bodies scattered across the warehouse floor proved that. But as he lifted her into his arms, carrying her away from the carnage, she felt only safety. She had married a monster, yes, but he was her monster, and his darkness would always protect her light. Damiano barked orders to his men in Italian as they exited the warehouse, keeping Elena pressed tightly against his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath his suit, the adrenaline of battle slowly giving way to relief. His fingers traced constant patterns on her skin, as if reassuring himself she was real. She was safe. She was his. Elena lay propped against silk pillows in their bedroom, the night's horrors still fresh in her mind. Her wrists bore red marks from the ropes, and though a doctor had assured them the baby was fine, Damiano hadn't stopped watching her every breath since they returned. He sat in an armchair pulled close to the bed, his suit still stained with blood, refusing every attempt by his men to draw him away for urgent business. Through the open windows, she could hear cars arriving and departing, voices speaking in hushed Italian as his organization dealt with the warehouse massacre. The sounds made her shiver, remembering the precise way Damiano had executed her captors. "You're thinking too hard," he said softly, reaching for her hand. His fingers were clean now, but she had seen them covered in blood only hours ago. "I saw what you did," Elena whispered, not pulling away but not quite holding on either. "The way you killed them. It was like watching a different person." Damiano's jaw tightened. "That is who I am, Bella. A killer. A monster. But only to protect what's mine." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Does it frighten you, to know what I'm capable of?" "Yes," she admitted, meeting his dark gaze. "But what frightens me more is how safe it makes me feel. How right it seemed, watching you destroy anyone who threatened us." He leaned forward, his free hand moving to rest possessively on her stomach. "I will paint every street in this city red if that's what it takes to keep you both safe. The other families know now what happens when someone touches my wife." His voice dropped lower, dangerous. "They watch their brothers die screaming. They understand that Elena Vitali is untouchable." As if to confirm his words, a knock came at the door. One of his captains entered, bowing slightly. "Boss, the 5 families have sent their respects. They acknowledge the Lady Elena as your queen and swear no harm will come to her or the heir." Damiano dismissed him with a nod, but Elena caught the satisfaction in his eyes. He had wanted them all to witness his rampage. It wasn't just revenge. It was a message written in blood. "You planned it," she realized. "You made sure they would all know what happened to the traitors." Every death was a lesson, he agreed, not apologizing for his brutality. "Now no one will dare touch you again. You and our child will never know fear." Tears welled in Elena's eyes as everything clicked into place. His possessiveness, his control, his violence, it all stemmed from a desperate need to protect, to prevent another loss like his sister. This dangerous man had wrapped himself around her like armor, determined that no harm would ever reach her. "I love you," she whispered, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "God help me, Damiano, but I love you." His breath caught, and for a moment, the feared Mafia boss looked stunned, vulnerable. Then he surged forward, gathering her carefully in his arms, mindful of her bruises. His lips found her temple, her cheeks, catching her tears. "Say it again," he demanded softly, his own voice rough with emotion. "I love you," Elena repeated, stronger this time. She pressed her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. "Both the man and the monster. All of you." Elena gripped Damiano's hand as another contraction tore through her body. The private medical wing of the Vitali estate hummed with quiet efficiency as doctors and nurses moved around them. Through the large windows, the night sky stretched dark and endless. But inside, the room glowed with warm light. "Breathe, Bella," Damiano murmured, his usual commanding tones softened to gentle encouragement. He hadn't left her side for a moment, sending murderous glares at anyone who suggested he step out. His expensive suit jacket lay discarded, sleeves rolled up as he supported her through each wave of pain. "I can't," Elena gasped, sweat dampening her hair. "It hurts too much." "You can," he insisted, pressing his forehead to hers. "You're stronger than anyone I know. Show me that fire that made me fall in love with you." The doctor announced it was time to push. Elena screamed, crushing Damiano's hand with strength that would have surprised her months ago. He took the pain silently, whispering Italian endearments as she fought to bring their child into the world. "I see the head," the doctor called out. "One more big push, Mrs. Vitale." Elena gathered her remaining strength, drawing courage from Damiano's steady presence. With a final cry that echoed through the medical wing, their baby entered the world, announcing its arrival with powerful lungs. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, lifting up their daughter. Damiano's breath caught as the nurses quickly cleaned and wrapped the infant. When they placed her in his arms, the feared Mafia boss handled her like she was made of glass. His hands, capable of such violence, trembled as they cradled their daughter's tiny form. Elena watched in awe as silent tears tracked down his cheeks, the first she'd ever seen him shed. This man who ruled through fear and blood was completely undone by 7 pounds of new life. "She's perfect," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Like her mother. He carefully sat on the edge of Elena's bed, shifting their daughter into her arms while keeping one hand protectively around them both. "What should we name her?" Elena asked softly, counting tiny fingers and toes. Damiano stroked their daughter's cheek with a gentle finger. "Sophia," he said after a moment, "for my sister. But this time," his voice cracked, "this time I'll protect her. Both of you. You are my redemption, my chance to be more than just a killer." Through the windows, the first rays of dawn began painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The Vitali estate slowly came alive below, but in their private sanctuary, time seemed to stand still. Damiano gathered Elena closer, their daughter nestled safely between them. His lips brushed her temple as he murmured, "You saved me the moment you walked into my world. And now, I'll spend every breath proving you were never a mistake, you were destiny." Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the fierce love and protection radiating from him. Their daughter slept peacefully, unaware that she was born into both danger and devotion, that her father's empire would burn before harm touched her. In that moment, as sunrise blessed their new family, Elena knew that love truly could transform even the darkest souls. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.